They were about to hang a 16-year-old girl. The gallows stood dark against the blistering July sun, a skeleton of rough-hewn timber waiting for a soul. Below, the crowd buzzed like angry hornets, their faces a blur of sweat and judgment. Dust, fine as powdered bone, coated everything, turning the air thick and hard to breathe. The church bell wasn't ringing, it was tolling, a slow, heavy beat that sounded like a hammer on the coffin of hope. On the platform, Lydia Mae Harkins stood small and broken. Her hands bound tight in front of her, wouldn't stop shaking. Her Sunday dress, the one her mother had sewn from 100 saved scraps, was torn at the shoulder. But her eyes weren't on the crowd, or the hangman, or the grim-faced sheriff whose hand hovered over the lever. Her gaze was fixed somewhere far away, on a memory only she could see. Then came the sound. It started as a low thrumming, a vibration in the soles of their feet. Hoofbeats, not the frantic clatter of a panicked horse, but the heavy, deliberate pound of a creature that knew its own power. The crowd parted like a dirty tide, and a man on a warhorse of a mule stepped out of the sun's glare. He was tall, dressed in weathered buckskin, and looked like he'd been carved from the mountain itself. Every step he took was a challenge. Every line on his face told a story of survival. He didn't shout. He didn't draw a weapon. He just stopped at the foot of the gallows and looked up. His voice cut through the heat, sharper and colder than any blade. "Hold!" The sheriff's hand froze. The hangman stilled. The whole town of Sundown Hollow held its breath. But this wasn't the rescue they thought it was. It wasn't about saving an innocent girl. It was about exposing a guilty town. And the secret he carried was 1,000 times more dangerous than the noose around Lydia's neck. Because in Sundown Hollow, the truth doesn't just kill you, it makes you wish you were dead first. My name is Luther Braddock, and those folks in the square, they saw a stranger, a mountain man who'd wandered into their official business. They were wrong. I knew these hills better than any of them. I'd seen the rot that grew in the shadows of towns like this, the kind of poison that starts with whispers and ends with a rope. The sheriff, a man named Harlan with more sweat on his brow than conviction in his heart, tried to stare me down. "This here's official business," he said, his voice trying for authority but landing on nervous. "Best you move along." "This here's my business now," I said, my voice as flat and hard as the prairie. I planted my feet in the dust. I wasn't moving. Not an inch. I looked past him, up at the girl, Lydia. Her chest was barely moving, her breaths shallow little gasps. The rope was already biting into the skin of her neck, leaving a raw red mark. She was 16, and she was about to die for stealing a horse. "Law's clear on horse theft," Harlan said, but his eyes darted to the crowd, gauging their mood. He was a weather vane, not a lawman. Girl was caught red-handed with Turner's prize stallion. A man pushed his way to the front, Jasper Turner. He was big in the way that soft men get, all belly and jowls. A silver watch chain gleamed against his vest. He was the kind of man who owned things. Land, cattle, people. He thought he owned the law, too. "Found her myself," Turner spat, his voice slick with satisfaction. "Leading my horse away in the dead of night. A thief, just like her mother." A murmur went through the crowd. I saw the looks, the hard, knowing nods. This wasn't just about a horse anymore. It was about blood. I ignored him. I looked straight at Lydia. My voice when I spoke to her was different, softer, the way you talk to a spooked colt. "That true, girl? You take his horse?" Her voice was a fragile thing, a thread of sound in the oppressive heat, but it didn't break. "I was returning him," she whispered, and a few people in the front leaned in to hear. "I found him tangled in wire down by Crow Creek. His leg was bleeding something awful. I couldn't just leave him." The story had the ring of truth. Crow Creek was a good 5 miles from Turner's ranch, in the opposite direction of anywhere a horse thief would be heading. The pieces started clicking into place in my mind, forming a picture I didn't like. "Seems to me," I said, my voice rising again, carrying over the crowd, "the real question ain't how she got that horse. It's how that horse got tangled in wire 5 miles from its own stable." Turner's face went from red to a blotchy purple. "It don't matter how it got there. She was taking what wasn't hers." Saving a life ain't stealing, I shot back, turning my glare on the sheriff. The law says intent matters, Harland. Or did you forget that part? You fixing to hang a child for an act of mercy? Harlan shifted his weight. The tin star on his chest felt heavy, I'm sure. The crowd was getting restless now. The whispers weren't just about Lydia's mother anymore. They were questions, doubts. A few of the town's women had moved closer, their faces tight with concern. A girl that young, it just wasn't right. There's procedures, the sheriff stammered, his authority leaking away into the dust. Procedure would have been a proper trial. I cut him off. My hand moved, resting near the well-worn handle of the knife on my belt. It wasn't a threat, just a fact. Unless the law in Sundown Hollow is whatever Jasper Turner says it is on any given morning. That hit home. I saw nods. I saw faces turning to look at Turner, not with admiration now, but with suspicion. Mrs. Baker, the minister's wife, a woman with a spine of pure hickory, stepped forward. I've known Lydia since she was a baby. Her mother taught her to be kind, not to steal. Her mother was Cherokee, Turner spat, the venom in his voice so thick you could taste it. Everyone knows what they are. Before the poison could spread, I stepped in front of him. Everyone knows her mother was the finest seamstress this side of the territory, I said, my voice dropping low and dangerous. And everyone knows her daddy was as white as you, Turner, so you watch your mouth. The silence that fell was absolute. You could have heard a feather drop. My eyes never left the sheriff's face. I had him pinned. The crowd was turning. He had a choice to make, right here, right now, in front of everyone. Way I see it, Sheriff, I said, laying it out for him. You got two choices. You cut that girl loose and give her a proper hearing, or you explain to the territorial marshal why you hanged a 16-year-old girl without a trial, based on nothing but the word of a man who seems mighty interested in her family's bloodline. Harlan's jaw worked. He looked at me. He looked at Turner. He looked at the shifting, uncertain faces of the crowd. The sun beat down. The gallows creaked. Finally, he looked at the hangman. Cut her loose. The rope fell away from Lydia's neck like a dead snake. The relief hit her so hard her legs gave out, and she crumpled. But I was already on the steps, moving faster than a man my age had any right to, and I caught her before she hit the boards. I held her steady, my hand on her arm, the same way I gentle a wild thing. She was trembling all over, a leaf in a storm. It ain't right, Turner bellowed, his face a thundercloud. But his voice was drowned out by the turning tide. People were looking at him now, their faces cold. No, it ain't, I agreed, helping Lydia down the last of the steps. But we're going to make it right. I looked at Sheriff Harlan. The man looked like he'd just been pardoned himself. I'm claiming the right to speak for this girl at her hearing, and I'm going to have some questions about that horse, about that wire, about how a man's prize stallion ends up 5 miles from home in the middle of the night. Harlan, eager to look like he was in charge again, nodded quickly. Hearing will be in 3 days. The girl is to stay in town. She'll stay with me, Mrs. Baker announced, stepping forward and wrapping a protective arm around Lydia's shaking shoulders. She glared at the crowd as if daring anyone to object. Come on, child. Let's get you cleaned up and fed. As they started to move away, I caught Lydia's eye. Don't you worry, I said, my voice low. Truth has a way of coming out. Her eyes, big and dark in her pale face, filled with tears. My little brother. Jesse, she choked out. He's all alone at our cabin. He's been alone since they took me. A brother. The stakes just got higher. I'll fetch him, I promised. You just get your strength back. I watched them walk toward the parsonage, a small island of kindness in a sea of judgment. The gallows stood empty, its shadow stretching long and accusing across the square. My work here was just beginning. I'd stopped a hanging, but I hadn't delivered justice. Not yet. To do that, I had to unravel a lie that had been poisoning this town for years. And I had a sinking feeling that the horse was just the first thread. Before I could head for my mule, Harlan came over, adjusting his gun belt. You've taken quite an interest in this business, Braddock. Seen too many good people get hurt by quick judgment in quicker rope, I said, my face unreadable. Sometimes a man's got to stand in the way. Turner's got a lot of influence in this town, the sheriff warned, his voice barely a whisper. I looked out toward the mountains, my home. And I've got the truth on my side, I replied. Let's see which one carries more weight. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there in the dust. My mind was already on Crow Creek and the story a horse's tracks might tell. And in a lonely cabin, a little boy was waiting. He didn't know it yet, but help was on the way. But as I rode out of town, a chilling thought hit me. What if Turner wasn't just trying to get rid of Lydia? What if he was trying to hide something? Something connected to her mother and that prize stallion, and a secret that went back 15 years. The rescue was the easy part. The real fight was just about to begin. And I was walking right into the middle of it. The trail to Lydia's cabin was barely a path, a faint scar winding through juniper and sage. It was the kind of place people forgot on purpose. After a few miles, the last signs of Sundown Hollow vanished, replaced by the vast, unforgiving silence of the wilderness. The cabin itself was little more than a shack, tucked into a hollow by a creek that had almost dried up in the summer heat. It was small, but it was clean, a testament to a mother who had taught her children to have pride, even when they had nothing else. I found the boy Jesse, huddled on the front step. He couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with the same big dark eyes as his sister, full of a fear that was far too old for his face. He scrambled back when he saw me, his hand flying to a small, crudely carved wooden bird tucked into his pocket. He was ready to run. I dismounted slow, keeping my hands where he could see them. "Jesse?" I said, my voice gentle. "My name is Luther. Your sister Lydia, she sent me." His eyes widened, a flicker of hope warring with his suspicion. Is she okay?" "She's safe," I said. "She's in town with Mrs. Baker, the minister's wife. She's worried about you." He seemed to deflate with relief, his small shoulders slumping. "They took her," he whispered. "Mr. Turner and the sheriff. They said she was a thief." "Well, they were wrong," I said, sitting down on the step a few feet away from him, giving him space. "And we're going to prove it. But right now I need to get you to your sister." He looked around the small empty cabin, at the single room that held his entire world. Leaving it felt like a betrayal. "It's okay," I said, understanding. "We'll come back. This is just for a little while." He finally nodded, a tiny jerky movement. He trusted me, a trust I had to earn. As I helped him onto my mule, setting him in front of me, I noticed something. Tucked under the loose floorboard of the porch was a small leather-bound book, his mother's Bible. I hesitated, then reached down and pulled it out. It felt important, a link to the past, to the woman Turner had so easily slandered. I tucked it into my saddlebag. It was better with us than left here for anyone to find. The ride back to town was quiet. The boy was exhausted, and his small body leaned back against mine, his breathing evening out as he drifted off to sleep. Holding him, I felt a familiar ache in my chest, an echo of a daughter I'd lost to fever years ago, a pain that never truly goes away. It just learns to live beside you. Maybe that's why I'd stopped. Maybe that's why I had to see this through. Because I saw my own daughter in Lydia's eyes, and I would not let another good soul be swallowed by the darkness. When we got back to the parsonage, the reunion between Lydia and Jesse was a thing of heartbreaking beauty. She ran out the door and swept him up into her arms, burying her face in his hair, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He clung to her like a drowning boy to a raft. They were all each other had in the world, an island in a hostile sea. Mrs. Baker watched from the doorway, dabbing her eyes with her apron. This was more than just a girl accused of theft. This was about family and survival, and the desperate love that holds two orphans together. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, I sat with Mrs. Baker in her small, lamplit parlor. I pulled out the Bible. "This was at their cabin," I said, placing it on the table between us. She ran a hand over the worn leather cover. "Sarah's Bible," she said softly. "Lydia's mother. She was a good woman, Luther, a devout Christian. The things Turner said about her, they're lies, all of them." "He mentioned a horse," I said. "Claims she stole one from his father years ago." Mrs. Baker's lips thinned into a hard line. "That's the root of it all," she said, her voice dropping. "The story Turner tells is that Sarah Harkins, a poor Cherokee woman, seduced his father, and then ran off with his prize mare and some drifter. The story is a lie. She leaned forward, the lamplight casting deep shadows on her face. The truth is, old Thomas Turner fell in love with her, deeply, but he was a coward. He wouldn't acknowledge her publicly. He gave her that horse as a gift, a promise. But when his son, Ephraim, found out, he was furious. The scandal, the shame of it. Ephraim drove her away. He invented the story about the theft to cover his father's tracks and ruin her name forever. The poison, it ran deeper than I thought. Is there any proof? I asked. Sarah always said she had a bill of sale, Mrs. Baker whispered, signed by Thomas Turner himself. Proof the horse was a gift, not a theft. She kept it, she said, in case Ephraim ever came after her or her children. My heart started to pound. A bill of sale, a piece of paper that could tear Turner's whole world apart. Where would she have kept it? She never said. Somewhere safe, somewhere only she would know. Mrs. Baker looked at the Bible on the table. She treasured that book above all else, read from it every night. My hand went to the Bible. I opened the cover. The pages were filled with her delicate handwriting, notes in the margins, verses underlined, and tucked between the pages of the book of Psalms, I found it, a folded, yellowed piece of paper. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. It was a bill of sale for one bay mare, dated 15 years ago. And at the bottom, in a clear, strong hand, was the signature, Thomas Turner. I looked at Mrs. Baker. Her eyes were wide. He's been lying all these years, she breathed. Yes, I said, a cold, hard anger solidifying in my gut. And now we're going to make him answer for it. I had the proof, the silver bullet that would not only free Lydia, but would expose Jasper Turner for the liar and the bigot he was. But as I held that piece of paper, a new, more terrifying thought emerged. Turner wasn't just a man protecting his family's name. He was a man who had built his entire life, his entire fortune, on a foundation of lies. And a man like that, he wouldn't just let you expose him. He would do anything, anything to bury the truth, and us along with it. The next morning, I left Lydia and Jessie in the care of Mrs. Baker. The parsonage was the safest place in town, but I knew that safety was temporary. Turner was like a wounded wolf. He was most dangerous when he was cornered. I needed to see how the town was breathing, to feel the currents of gossip and fear. My first stop was the general store. Hattie Calloway, the owner, was a woman who saw and heard everything. Her store was the town's confessional, its newsroom, and its rumor mill, all rolled into one. I bought a bag of coffee and some flour, lingering at the counter. Heard you stirred up a hornet's nest yesterday, Hattie said, not looking up from weighing the flour. Sometimes a nest needs stirring, I replied. She finished with the flour and tied the bag, finally meeting my eyes. Her gaze was sharp. You be careful, Luther. Jasper Turner practically owns this town. The mine, the bank, even Sheriff Harlan owes him money. A big debt from what I hear. That changed things. Harlan wasn't just weak, he was compromised. His decision to release Lydia hadn't been about justice, it had been about fear. Fear of the crowd turning on him, which was, for a moment, greater than his fear of Turner. But that could change. Thanks for the warning, Hattie, I said, my voice grim. I left the store with a heavy feeling in my gut. Turner didn't just have influence, he had the law in his pocket. A proper hearing was a fantasy. They would find a way to discredit me, to silence Lydia, to make that bill of sale disappear. I decided to take a ride out to Crow Creek. I needed to see the place where Lydia said she'd found the horse. It was a long shot, but maybe, just maybe, there was something there. The creek was low, the banks a mess of tangled brush and sun-baked mud. I followed it for a mile, my eyes scanning the ground. And then I found it. A section of barbed wire, not old and rusted, but new. It was strung low between two cottonwood trees, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. And it was cut. Not broken, but snipped clean, as if with a pair of pliers. This was no accident. It was a trap. Someone had deliberately injured that horse and left it there for Lydia to find. The setup was perfect. It put Lydia, whose cabin was nearby, in a position where her good heart would condemn her. She would find the horse, try to help it, and walk right into Turner's accusation. This was premeditated, cold-blooded, and it meant Turner wasn't just an opportunist, he was a monster. He hadn't just seized a chance to get rid of Lydia, he had manufactured it. My blood ran cold. The bill of sale was my proof against an old lie. But this was proof of a new one. I snipped a piece of the wire and tucked it into my pocket. I rode back to town with a storm brewing inside me. The game had changed. This wasn't just about clearing a girl's name anymore. It was about stopping a man who would hurt an animal, trap a child, and manipulate an entire town just to protect his hateful secrets. When I got back to the parsonage, the sun was low in the sky, painting the clouds in shades of blood and fire. Mrs. Baker met me at the door, her face pale, her hands twisting in her apron. "Luther," she said, her voice tight with panic. "They were here." "Who was here?" I demanded, my hand instinctively going to my knife. "Two of Turner's ranch hands. They didn't come in. They just stood across the street, watching for a whole hour. They just left. They were sending a message. I have you. I can get to you whenever I want." The parsonage wasn't safe anymore. Nowhere was. I walked into the parlor. Lydia was reading to Jessie from their mother's Bible, her voice soft but steady. They looked up when I entered, their faces a portrait of fragile hope. How could I tell them that the monster wasn't just at the door, but that he had been planning this all along? That night I didn't sleep. I sat in a chair by the window, my rifle across my lap, watching the dark, silent street. I had the bill of sale, I had the piece of wire, I had the truth. But I was one man against a town held in a grip of fear and debt. Turner wasn't going to wait for the hearing. He knew I had the proof, and he would stop at nothing to get it back. I was no longer the hunter. I was the hunted, and I was trapped in a cage with the very people I was trying to protect. The sun would rise in a few hours, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that Turner would make his move before then. The night was far from over. The attack came just before dawn, in that gray, liminal hour when the world is caught between dream and waking. It wasn't a subtle threat this time. It was a declaration of war. A rock shattered the parlor window, a crude note tied around it. It landed on the floor with a crash that jolted the whole house awake. I had my rifle up before the glass finished falling. Lydia screamed from the back room. I heard Mrs. Baker calming her, telling Jessie it was just the storm. But there was no storm, only the one we were in. I crept to the broken window, staying low. The street was empty, bathed in the eerie pre-dawn light. I picked up the rock. The note was simple, the words scrawled in charcoal. "Get out or die." Classic Turner. All brute force and no subtlety. But then I saw it. Another piece of paper tucked into the string. It was a page torn from a ledger, a list of names and numbers. At the top was Sheriff Harlan's name, and next to it, the sum of $500. A fortune. Below his name were others. The blacksmith, the stable owner, Hattie Calloway from the general store. It was Turner's payroll, a list of every important person in town who was in his debt. This wasn't just a threat. It was a boast. He was telling me, I own this town. Every last soul. You can't win. He was right. I couldn't win by playing his game, by waiting for a hearing that would be a sham. Harlan would never rule against the man who held his leash. Hattie would never testify. No one would. We were alone. "We have to leave," Mrs. Baker said, her voice trembling as she looked at the list. "He'll burn the house down around us." "No," I said, my mind racing. "Running is what he wants. He wants us gone, discredited, the story twisted to make us look like the guilty ones who fled." I looked at Lydia, who had come into the room holding Jessie's hand. Her face was terrified, but there was a fire in her eyes I hadn't seen before. The fear was being burned away by anger. "My mother never ran," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "She stood her ground. We have to, too." She was right, but standing our ground here was suicide. We needed a new plan. "Okay," I said, the idea forming, desperate and dangerous. "We're not running, but we're not staying here either. Pack what you can carry, quickly." We moved in the half-light, a frantic, whispered rush. Mrs. Baker packed a bag of food. Lydia gathered the children's few belongings. I took the bill of sale from the Bible and tucked it deep inside my shirt. I then took another blank piece of paper, folded it, and placed it back inside the Bible. A decoy. It was a slim chance, but it was the only one I had. Our destination was my cabin. It was remote, defensible, miles from Sundown Hollow and Turner's Reach. He wouldn't expect us to run toward the wilderness, but back to it. It was my only advantage, my home turf. We slipped out the back of the parsonage as the first hint of sun touched the horizon. The town was still asleep. We moved like ghosts through the alleys, avoiding the main street. At the livery, I didn't bother waking the stable master, who was on Turner's list. I took my mule and borrowed a sturdy gelding, leaving a pouch of coins on the desk that was more than fair. A debt I would settle later. We rode out of town as the sun came up, casting long, accusing shadows behind us. Every sound, every rustle of leaves made me turn in the saddle. But we saw no one. For a moment, I allowed myself to think we had made it, that we had a chance. But the feeling didn't last. As we crested the first ridge and looked back, we saw it. A column of black smoke, thick and oily, rising from the center of town, right where the parsonage stood. Lydia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Jessie started to cry. Turner hadn't waited. He'd made his move. He was burning it all down. The evidence, the witnesses, the very idea that anyone could stand against him. And that's when the most terrible thought of all struck me. He hadn't just burned the parsonage to destroy the Bible with the decoy paper inside. He had burned it because he thought we were still in there. This wasn't about intimidation anymore. This was about murder. He had tried to burn a minister's wife and 2 children alive. The last flicker of hope for a civilized solution died in me. There would be no trial. There would be no hearing. This would be settled the old way, man to man. Out in the wild, where there were no paid-off sheriffs or terrified witnesses, there was only the truth, and the one who was left standing to tell it. The ride to my cabin was a blur of grim determination. We pushed the animals hard, stopping only for a few moments to water them at a hidden spring. The smoke from Sundown Hollow followed us for miles, a dark finger pointing at us from the past. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every gust of wind sounded like approaching hoofbeats. Jesse had cried himself to sleep, his small head bobbing against Lydia's chest. Lydia herself was a statue of silent fury, her eyes fixed on the trail ahead, her jaw set. The fear was gone, replaced by something harder, something colder. She had seen the monster's true face. My cabin was nestled in a high valley, surrounded by a thick stand of pine and granite cliffs. It was a fortress built by nature. There was only one trail in, a narrow track that was easily watched. I'd spent years learning every rock and tree, every game trail and hideout in these mountains. If Turner wanted a fight, he would have to come to my church. We arrived in the late afternoon, the horses lathered and trembling with exhaustion. The cabin was as I'd left it, spare, solid, safe. A fire was laid in the hearth, ready for a match. Dried herbs hung from the rafters, filling the single room with the scent of pine and sage. It wasn't much, but it was home, and for now it was a sanctuary. "He'll come for us," Lydia said, her voice flat. It wasn't a question. "I know," I said, checking the load on my rifle, "and we'll be ready." The first day was spent preparing. I showed Lydia how to set snares along the trail, not to catch animals, but as silent alarms. A tripped snare would ring a small bell I'd hidden in the trees, giving us a warning long before anyone reached the cabin. We brought in extra firewood and water from the creek. I found my father's old rifle, a heavy buffalo gun, hidden under a loose floorboard. I handed it to Lydia. "You know how to use one of these?" I asked. She nodded, taking the weapon. Her hands were steady. "My father taught me," she said. "He said a woman in this country needs to know how to protect herself. He was a wise man." That night, a storm rolled in, a great booming tempest that shook the cabin to its foundations. Lightning lit up the valley in stark, flashing tableaus, and thunder cracked like the sky was breaking apart. In the brief, brilliant flashes, I watched Lydia and Jessie huddled together under a quilt. They were terrified, but they were together, safe. The storm was a blessing, covering our tracks, making pursuit impossible for a time. It gave us a night to breathe, to think. The next morning, the world was washed clean. The air was crisp and cool, but the peace was short-lived. Around noon, one of the bells chimed, a soft, tinny sound that echoed through the pines. Someone was on the trail. I grabbed my rifle and motioned for Lydia to get Jesse to the back of the cabin, away from the single window. I crept to my vantage point, a narrow slit between two boulders 100 yards from the cabin, offering a clear view of the trail below. I waited. My breathing was slow and even. The mountain was silent around me. Then I saw him, a single rider. It wasn't Turner. It was Sheriff Harlan. He was riding slow, his head on a swivel, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. He looked like a man walking into his own execution. He wasn't leading a posse. He was alone. Something was wrong. This wasn't the attack I was expecting. I held my fire, watching him. He rode up to the clearing in front of the cabin and stopped, his horse shifting nervously. "Braddock!" he yelled, his voice thin and reedy in the vast emptiness. "I know you're in there. I need to talk." This was a trick. It had to be. Turner's men were probably hidden in the trees waiting for me to show myself. I remained silent, motionless. "Damn it, Braddock! This ain't what you think!" Harlan shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. He swung down from his horse, holding his hands up, away from his gun. "I'm alone. I swear it. Turner. He's gone crazy. After the fire, he found out you'd all gotten away. He beat one of his own men half to death for letting you slip past. He's rounding up a posse of his own. Not lawmen, hired guns, killers. He's not coming to arrest you, Braddock. He's coming to bury you." I still didn't move. This could still be a lie, a way to draw me out. "Listen to me," Harlan pleaded, taking a step closer to the cabin. "The bill of sale, it's not what you think it is. It's a fake." My blood ran cold. A fake? It was impossible. The signature. "It's a forgery," Harlan yelled, his words tumbling over each other. "A damn good one, but it's not Thomas Turner's signature. I checked it against some old bank ledgers this morning. Turner's son, Ephraim, he must have planted it in that Bible for you to find. It's a trap, Braddock. He wanted you to bring it to the hearing. He would have had experts prove it was a fake. He would have made you look like the liar. He would have hanged you right alongside the girl." The world tilted on its axis. The whole thing. A setup. He hadn't just manufactured the crime. He had manufactured the proof of innocence. He'd played me. He'd led me down a path of his own making, right into a dead end. I had charged into Sundown Hollow thinking I was a savior, a man of truth. But I had been a pawn, and I had led Lydia and Jesse not to safety, but to a deadlier trap than the one we'd left. Harlan was still shouting, "He's coming, Braddock. He's coming with at least a dozen men. You don't have much time. I came to warn you because nobody deserves what he's got planned. Not even you." The piece of paper tucked in my shirt, the one I had thought was our salvation, was worthless. Worse than worthless, it was a liability. The real proof, if it ever existed, was still out there. Or it had been destroyed long ago. We had nothing, no evidence, no allies, and a dozen hired guns were on their way up the mountain to erase us from the world. The sanctuary I had brought them to was about to become our tomb. The sheriff's words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. A fake. The whole thing had been a meticulously crafted lie. Turner hadn't just been covering his tracks. He'd been laying new ones, leading me right where he wanted me. He'd made me his fool. I emerged from the rocks, my rifle held low. Harlan flinched, his hand darting toward his gun before he stopped himself. His face was a mess of sweat and fear. He looked like a man who had finally seen the devil he worked for. "Why?" I asked, my voice a low growl. "Why warn me?" "Because he's not just coming for you," Harlan said, his eyes wild. "He knows I talked to you. He knows I let the girl go. After his posse deals with you, I'm next on his list. He's cleaning house, tying up every loose end." Self-preservation, the oldest motivator of them all. He wasn't here to be a hero. He was here to save his own skin. "How long do we have?" I asked, my mind already calculating, shifting from defense to something else. "An hour. maybe 2. They're coming up the old logging trail on the east side, trying to circle around behind you. He'd given me everything. The numbers, the route, the timeline. He'd handed me the keys to his boss's downfall, all to save himself. "Get out of here, Harlan," I said, my voice cold. "Ride west and don't stop. If you're lucky, he'll think you ran. If you're not—" I didn't need to finish. He scrambled onto his horse and galloped down the trail without a backward glance. A coward fleeing the fire he'd helped set. I went back to the cabin. Lydia was standing in the doorway, the heavy buffalo gun in her hands. She had heard everything. Her face was ashen. "It was all a lie?" she whispered. "Yes," I said. "But it doesn't matter now. There's only one thing that matters: survival." My mind was clear, the shock replaced by a cold, hard focus. I was a mountain man. I knew this terrain like the back of my hand. Turner and his hired guns, they were flatlanders. They were walking into my world, a world of shadows, deadfalls, and ambush points. They thought they were the hunters. It was time to remind them what it felt like to be the prey. "We can't stay here," I said. "This cabin is a death trap. We have to move, higher up." I grabbed my saddlebag, stuffing it with what little food we had, my knife, and a length of rope. "Bring the guns and all the ammunition we have." We slipped out the back of the cabin and into the thick pine forest. The ground was soft with years of fallen needles, muffling our footsteps. I led them up a steep, barely their game trail, climbing higher into the rocky crags that overlooked the valley. It was hard going. Jesse stumbled, his small legs struggling to keep up. Lydia practically carried him, her breath coming in ragged gasps, but she never complained. The fire in her eyes had become a burning coal. We found our spot in a small cave hidden behind a waterfall, its entrance obscured by a thick curtain of moss and ferns. It was damp and cold, but it was invisible from the valley floor. From a narrow ledge nearby, I could look down and see my cabin, looking like a child's toy. We were hidden. We were safe. For now. "They'll search the cabin, and when they don't find us, they'll spread out," I told Lydia, my voice a whisper against the roar of the waterfall. "They'll be looking for tracks, but this storm and this rock, we won't have left any. They'll think we ran down the mountain, not up." "And then what?" she asked, her knuckles white as she gripped the rifle. "And then," I said, a grim smile touching my lips, "I go hunting." I left them in the cave with a pistol and a promise to be back by nightfall. I moved through the forest like a ghost, my buckskins blending with the trees and shadows. I circled around, coming up behind the old logging trail Harlan had mentioned, and I waited. It wasn't long before I heard them. The jingle of harnesses, the low murmur of voices, the clumsy crashing of men who didn't know the first thing about moving quietly in the woods. There were 12 of them, just as Harlan had said, led by Turner himself. They were armed to the teeth, a pack of dogs let off the leash. They were confident, arrogant, and they were about to walk into hell. I let them pass my position, moving deeper into a narrow canyon I knew well. It was a natural choke point with steep, wooded sides. Once they were in, I started my work. I didn't use my rifle. A gunshot would give away my position. I used the mountain itself. My first target was the man at the rear of the column, a simple tripwire, a snare I'd learned from the Cherokee years ago. He went down hard, his horse rearing and screaming. Confusion rippled through the line. While they were distracted, I was already moving. Higher up the canyon wall, I dislodged a small rock slide I'd scouted years before. It wasn't big enough to kill, but it was enough to spook their horses and separate 3 more men from the main group. Panic began to set in. They were firing their guns wildly into the trees, shooting at shadows. They were city killers, used to back alleys and barroom brawls. Out here, in the deep woods, they were blind and clumsy. And they were terrified. I spent the next hour playing their fear like a fiddle, a thrown rock to my left to draw their fire, while I slipped away to the right. A bird call they wouldn't recognize, making them think they were surrounded. I picked them off, one by one. Not killing, disabling. A well-placed rock to knock a man from his saddle. A bola made of rope and stones to tangle the legs of a horse. I turned the forest into a weapon. By the time the sun started to set, Their dozen was down to 5. Turner and his 4 most loyal men. They were terrified, huddled together in the bottom of the canyon, their horses gone. Their bravado had evaporated, replaced by the primal fear of the unknown. They knew something was out there in the dark, something ancient and patient and lethal. And that's when I finally revealed myself. I stepped out onto a ledge above them, my rifle held loosely in my hands, the setting sun at my back turning me into a dark, faceless silhouette. Turner looked up, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. "Braddock!" he screamed, raising his pistol. "It's over, Turner," I called down, my voice echoing off the canyon walls. "Your men are gone. Your lies are over." "I'll kill you!" he shrieked, firing his pistol. The shot went wide, the bullet whining past my head and smacking into the rock behind me. But he had made a fatal mistake. The muzzle flash in the gathering dusk had revealed his exact position, and it had revealed something else. Just behind him, half hidden in the brush, was the entrance to an old abandoned mine shaft, a place I knew was unstable, a place I knew had a secret. I didn't fire back at Turner. I raised my rifle, took careful aim at the rock face just above the mine entrance, and squeezed the trigger. The shot from my rifle didn't sound like a normal gunshot. It was a deep, resonant crack that echoed through the canyon, not just in the air, but through the rock itself. For a moment, nothing happened. Turner and his men stared up at me, their faces a mix of confusion and defiance. Then a low groaning sound started, coming from deep within the mountain. The ground beneath their feet trembled. Dust trickled from the rock face above the old mine shaft. The trickle became a stream. The stream became a river of rock and dirt. "What did you do?" Turner screamed, his voice thin with terror. The entire cliff face above the mine entrance gave way. A tidal wave of rock and earth, loosened by my perfectly placed shot, thundered down into the canyon. It didn't hit them directly. It hit the ground in front of them, completely sealing the narrow canyon. They weren't crushed. They were entombed, trapped between the rock slide I had just created and the one that blocked the other end of the canyon miles back. I hadn't killed them. I had buried them alive. Silence descended, thick and heavy, broken only by the panicked whinnies of a few remaining horses and the terrified shouts of the trapped men. Their voices were muffled, distant, the sound of ghosts already claimed by the earth. I stood on the ledge for a long moment, the rifle still warm in my hands. I had done it. I had used their own aggression, their own path, to lead them into a prison of rock and stone. There was no escape, not without heavy equipment and a week of digging. By the time anyone from Sundown Hollow organized a rescue, if they even bothered, my work would be done. I made my way back to the cave under the cover of darkness. The roar of the waterfall masked my approach. When I slipped through the curtain of water, Lydia was there, rifle raised, her face a pale oval in the gloom. She lowered the gun when she saw it was me, relief flooding her features. "I heard a shot," she said, her voice trembling. And then, the mountain shook. "It's overage," I said, my voice heavy with exhaustion. "They're trapped. They can't hurt us anymore." I explained what I had done, how I had used the mountain itself as my weapon. She listened in silence, her eyes wide. She wasn't horrified. She was awed. She had seen the world of men fail her. Now she was seeing the justice of the wilderness. "But what about the real proof?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The fake bill of sale? It means we have nothing." "Oh, I wouldn't say that," I said, a slow, tired smile spreading across my face. I reached into my saddlebag. It wasn't food I pulled out. It wasn't a weapon. It was a rusted, dented tin box. Sheriff Harland, in his panic, told me more than he realized. He mentioned Turner's father's old bank ledgers. It got me thinking. What else might be stored away from the old days? I had made a stop on my way up the mountain, a quick, quiet visit to the town records office, through a back window left unlocked. I hadn't been looking for land deeds or financial records. I had been looking for something much more personal. "This," I said, setting the box down between us, "is from the county clerk. It was filed away under miscellaneous, buried under 30 years of dust. I think Turner's father wanted it hidden, but couldn't bring himself to destroy it." With trembling fingers, Lydia lifted the rusted lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed cotton, was a photograph, a daguerreotype of a young couple, a handsome white man in a stiff collar, and beside him, a beautiful Cherokee woman, her dark hair in two long braids, her eyes proud and fearless. Lydia gasped. That's, that's my mother's sister, she whispered. Aunt Sarah, the one who disappeared. And that, I said, pointing to the man, is Thomas Turner, Ephraim's father. Beneath the photograph were two documents. The first was a legitimate, legally filed bill of sale for the Bay Mare, officially transferring ownership to Sarah Blackfox as a wedding gift. It was the real one, the one Turner had spent his life trying to erase. And the second document, that was the one that would change everything. It wasn't a deed. It wasn't a will. It was a marriage certificate, stamped and sealed by the territory of New Mexico, dated 16 years ago. Thomas Turner and Sarah Blackfox had been legally married. The implications hit us both at the same time. Lydia stared at the paper, her eyes unblinking. That means Ephraim Turner and me. Your family, I finished for her. He's your cousin. And this whole vendetta, this hatred he's carried, it's all been a lie to cover up the fact that his father married a Cherokee woman, a woman his son was too ashamed to acknowledge. The horse was never the issue. The theft was a lie built on a deeper lie. It was all about shame, about prejudice, about a son so poisoned by hate that he would rather try to murder his own kin than admit to the world that he had Native American blood in his family. We finally had it. Not just proof of innocence, but the truth. The whole ugly, complicated truth. The weapon that could not only free Lydia, but could dismantle Ephraim Turner's entire world. He was trapped in a canyon, but his real prison was the one of his own making, built over years of lies and hatred. And we were about to tear it down, stone by stone. The waterfall roared outside our hiding place, a constant, powerful sound, like the voice of the mountain itself, promising to wash away all the ugliness and leave only the clean, hard truth behind. The next morning, we walked out of the mountains and back into the world of men. We left the guns behind. We didn't need them anymore. The weapons we carried now were far more powerful. We rode into Sundown Hollow on my old mule, Lydia sitting tall, Jesse in front of her, clutching the tin box. The town was in chaos. News of the trapped posse had arrived, carried by the few men I had allowed to escape. No one knew what had happened, only that Turner and his core group were missing, presumed dead, in a mysterious rock slide. The town was a ship without a rudder. We didn't stop to talk to anyone. We walked straight to the center of the town square, to the empty space where the gallows had stood, and we waited. It didn't take long for the crowd to gather. They saw us and the whispers started. They saw the tin box in Jesse's hands and they grew quiet. Sheriff Harlan pushed his way through, his face pale and haggard. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a year. Braddock, he started, but I held up a hand. This isn't about me, I said, my voice carrying over the silent crowd. This is about the truth. I nodded to Lydia. She stepped forward, her voice clear and steady, with a strength no one in that town had ever heard from her before. She didn't shout. She didn't accuse. She simply told the story. She opened the tin box and held up the photograph of her aunt and Turner's father. She held up the real bill of sale, and then she held up the marriage certificate. A collective gasp went through the crowd. You could see the realization dawning on their faces. The years of whispered rumors, of casual prejudice, of accepted lies, all of it crumbled in the face of the simple, undeniable truth on that piece of paper. Lydia Harkins wasn't the descendant of a horse thief. She was the niece of the late Thomas Turner's legal wife. She was a part of one of the town's founding families. She belonged here, more perhaps than any of them. Then a movement at the edge of the crowd. It was Rebecca Turner, Ephraim's wife. She walked forward, her face a mask of quiet dignity. She stopped in front of Lydia and looked at the documents. She nodded slowly. I knew, she said, her voice soft but clear. I found these papers in the attic years ago. Ephraim, he made me swear to never speak of it. He lived in terror of this day. She turned to the crowd. My husband's hatred has poisoned this town for too long. He was so ashamed of his father's love, so afraid of what people would think, that he built a wall of lies around himself. That hatred is what trapped him in that canyon, not the rocks. That was it. The final stone laid in place. The truth, delivered not by an outsider, but by one of their own. The spell of fear was broken. I saw it in their eyes, the shame shifting from Lydia to themselves. They hadn't been tricked by Turner. They had been willing participants in his lie because it was easier than confronting their own prejudices. A few days later, a rescue party finally reached the canyon. They found Ephraim Turner and his men, alive but broken. When they brought him back to town, he wasn't the proud, powerful man who had ruled them with fear. He was a hollowed-out shell, his power gone, his secrets laid bare. No charges were ever filed against him. There was no need. He was a prisoner in his own town, forced to live every day with the truth and with the silent judgment in the eyes of the people he had once controlled. We rebuilt my cabin, but we rebuilt it bigger. The people of Sundown Hollow, in their shame and their newfound desire for atonement, helped. They brought lumber and supplies. They offered their time and their labor. It was their way of asking for forgiveness. The blacksmith forged new hinges for the door. Hattie Calloway brought curtains for the windows. Mrs. Baker helped Lydia plant a garden. The house we built wasn't just a home for me, Lydia, and Jesse. It was a testament to the fact that truth, like a persistent mountain stream, will eventually wear down even the hardest stone. It might take years. It might take a fight, but it will always, always find its way to the light. We had found our peace not by running, but by standing our ground and letting the truth fight the battle for us. And in the quiet evenings, sitting on the porch of our new home, watching the sun set over the mountains, we knew we had done more than just survive. We had healed, not just ourselves, but the wounded heart of a little town called Sundown Hollow. Stories like this remind us that courage isn't about the absence of fear. It's about acting in spite of it. It's about standing for what's right, even when you're standing alone. If those values still mean something to you, if you believe that truth can still win against the darkest of lies, then you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button, because the stories we share here are a reminder that in every one of us, there's the strength to face down the monsters and to fight for the light. I'll see you tomorrow.